Hello and welcome to everybody to our live event, live question and answer panel event this morning. Huge thank you to our panelists who have joined us. I'm going to go along my screen as I see them. So we've got Dr. Irgain Powell here from the Future Generations. Give us a wave. Julie James, the Minister for Climate, has joined us. And Poppy Stowell-Evans, who is the Chair of the Youth Climate Ambassadors. So thank you very much, Diolch yn fawr, for being with us this morning. My name's Bryony, so I'm chairing the event today. I work for Keep Wales Tidy as one of the education managers. And we've got a fantastic amount of schools and young people joining us. We've had 11 to 12 schools with us during the week so far. And this morning we have had a quick fire workshop session where we had some 72 registered for that session, so loads of brilliant ideas coming in. We'll invite you to join in with us through the chat. You can see it on your right hand side, and there's a question section, although we have got a lot of questions to get through, but please keep your comments clean on the chat if you could. Over to you, Rhian.
Diolch, Bryony. Croeso I bawb. Bydda I jyst yn gwneud cyfriniad yn Gymraeg i bawb, a wedyn mi fydd Bryony yn cario ymlaen i gadeirio. So croeso nôl i rhai fydd yn y sesiwn bore yma. I'r uwch gynhadledd ieuenctid gyntaf yma i hinsawdd y natur. Dwi'n gweithio i WWF Cymru. Diolch am ddod. Mae'r ffaith bod gymaint ohonoch chi wedi cyfrestru ddod yn anhygoel, felly diolch yn fawr iawn i ysgolion ac unigolion a bob math ohonoch chi wedi ymuno, felly diolch yn fawr. Mae'n dangos pa mor bwysig a faint o awydd sy'n yna ymysg bobl ifanc i drafod y materion pwysig yma, hinsawdd y natur yng Nghymru. Diolch yn fawr hefyd i WWF Cymru, i co-ysgolion, Cadw Cymru'n Daclus, Maint Cymru, a Llys Genedlaethol Hinsawdd Ieuenctid Cymru am gydweithio i ddod o'r digwyddiad yma i fodolaeth. Cofiwch bod croeso i chi ymuno ar y chat, felly cadwch chi'n lan, ond cofiwch gallwch chi gofyn cwestiynau, rhoi sylwadau fel mae atebion yn dod. Bryony, over to you.
Yeah, so as Rhian mentioned, thank you to WWF Cymru, to Size of Wales, to the Youth Climate Ambassadors for collaborating on this fantastic event. And what we'll be doing is all of your ideas, comments, we're going to pull together. Poppy and the Climate Ambassadors have agreed to pull them together for a series of asks and things that the young people in Wales would like to see going forwards. So we will get that out to you as soon as they've managed to do that. So I think we need to get on with the questions without further ado. We've had so many come in. We will try and cover as many as we can. But for those that we can't get around to answering, we will try and follow up with some answers within there. So a nice, easy first one to start with. Welsh Government has committed to protecting future generations. That obviously covers everybody here. What should they or you do in the next 4 years to deliver on this? So I'm gonna throw this one out to Irgain first, if that's okay, being that you work for the Future Generations Office. So what would you like to add to that question?
Thank you very much, Bryony. Yeah, bore da bawb. I just wanted to say, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in the event this morning. So I'm Irgain and I work for the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, Sophie Howe. I'm a change maker there, and I do a lot of work on climate change. So I think, we are really lucky in Wales because we've got this unique piece of legislation, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which was introduced by Welsh Government 5 years ago. And at that time, they also introduced the role of the Future Generations Commissioner, who I work for. And her role is to be the guardian of future generations. So, nowhere else in the world has anything quite like this piece of legislation. I think it's, a really great opportunity for us in Wales to make the brave and bold decisions that, we need to take account of the long-term impact of the things that we're all doing on current and future generations, and obviously acting on climate change, you know, is all about that really. So in terms of the question, what would I think government needs to do in the next 4 years? Obviously, they declared a climate emergency a couple of years ago. We've got, you know, lots of opportunities in terms of the policies that we need to see happen to, you know, take action on climate change. So I think the transport strategy that they launched earlier in the year is a really good example of leadership on climate change, and the recent announcement on roads as well is something that, you know, we also welcomed. So it's those kind of really brave policy decisions that I think we need to be seeing more of in terms of our buildings, you know, the housing that we all live in, and, you know, the land that we manage in Wales as well. They would be the key areas I would want to see action around.
Diolch yn fawr. I forgot to ask for that introduction, but well done, you pulled that in at the start there. So perhaps Julie, Minister for Climate, if you'd be happy to do a little introduction and then go on to your answer to that question for us.
Yeah, of course I will, Bryony, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this. It's a real pleasure and a privilege. So I'm Julie James. I'm the relatively newly appointed Minister for Climate Change in the Welsh Government. That's a portfolio that brings together nearly all the levers that the government has to make a real difference to the climate emergency and the nature emergency, and to make a real difference to the lives of the people of Wales. So we have the environment bits of the Welsh Government, we have transport, we have housing and regeneration, we have planning, so we have responsibility for things like the Clean Air Act, we have environmental protection infrastructure, we have pretty much all the levers. The one lever I don't have, but I work very closely with my colleague and friend Leslie Griffiths, is the responsibility for the sustainable farming, for farming and food. But we work very closely together, and indeed we work very closely together across the government with other colleagues as well to bring the levers together. So what will we do in the next 4 years? I mean, that's an incredible question. The first thing we have to do is we have to galvanise the people of Wales and give them the tools to be able to do the right thing. What we really want to do is we want to increase, in particular, children and young people's involvement in driving the response to the climate emergency. You know, they're the ones who'll be on the planet a lot longer than I will be, and so they're the ones that we're doing this for, the future generations that the Act talks about. This year, in particular, we're developing our Net Zero Wales plan, and it's absolutely crucial that we highlight the important role of children and young people and welcome their views and make sure that we harness their views and act on them. So we'll be publishing a draft Net Zero Wales plan before the climate conference in Glasgow in the autumn. And we'll be looking for input into that and then comments on it, and then we'll be looking to redo that climate change plan as often as is necessary to keep it up to date and to make sure that we're doing the right thing across Wales. We've got a lot to be proud of in Wales as a little nation, and I think sometimes we don't blow our own trumpets quite loudly enough. So just a few things I'll mention. We were the first fair trade nation, one of the first nations in the world to have a duty on sustainable development at the heart of our constitution. We're a founding signatory of something called the Under 2 Memorandum of Understanding, which brings together 220 governments across the world, representing 1.3 billion people and 43% of the global economy, which is a commitment to being under 2% warmer and hopefully under 1.75% warmer as a climate. So that's, you know, that's Wales on the global stage. We invest in Wales, of course, but our programs invest also in Africa, for example. So we recognise our global responsibility to act on climate change, and we work with our partners in Africa to build relationships, exchange knowledge, make a difference to both lives of people in Africa and the lives of people in Wales, to make sure that in doing the right thing here in Wales, we don't displace activity to people around the world who are less able to cope with it. So there's lots of things that we need to be careful of in thinking we're doing the right thing, that we don't just displace it to somewhere else in the world. Something we've been hiding our light under a bushel on this, so I want it publicised. Every child born in Wales has a tree planted for them in Wales and a tree planted for them in Africa. So every single child born in Wales has that, and we want to make sure that people in Wales realise that that's happening. So we're really keen on reforesting the world, and we will continue to do that. We have a very ambitious program to do that over the next 4 years. As part of our 10 million trees project, we've already planted 6 million trees in Uganda, reforesting a part of Uganda that had been very severely affected by deforestation and transforming the lives of the people there. I've had the real privilege of meeting many of them, and that's been fantastic. And then the last but not least, I could go on for another 4 hours actually, but the last but not least, in the last 15 years, we've transformed our municipal waste recycling. So we've gone from being bottom of the EU Recycling League to second in Europe and third in the world in recycling in that 10 years. And I think that's worth looking at, because that shows what we can do when we engage the hearts and minds of the people of Wales in showing them a platform for how to do the right thing. So the next thing we want to do is we want to look at banning single-use plastics. There's 9 in particular we're targeting, but actually there's a hearts and minds thing there as well, isn't it? Before the government is able to put that legislation in place, every one of us on this call can spread out to their friends, just refuse to have them. Tell the supermarkets you don't want them. If you're offered a drink in a cafe or bar and they give you those dreadful plastic straws, tell them you don't want them, and you're going to tell your friends that they're still using them and they won't come here anymore. It's about consumer and people power as much as governments banning things, because we need to drive corporations in Wales and companies in Wales to do the right thing, buy the right products, and then the way we consume them will really make a difference as well. And then, as again said, we're one of the few countries in the world to have enshrined Sustainable Development Goals in legislation, to have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and to have an emission target of net zero by 2050. So we're very proud of what we've done already, and now is the time to build on that and really galvanise the people of Wales who know that climate change is real, in making all of the small changes that we need to make in our lives to make a real difference.
Wonderful, thank you for that in-depth answer. And there were some really interesting points that came up there, especially linked to those displacement issues. And that's something we've touched on a little bit this morning and during the week. And that single use is, and the bottom-up approach as well as the top-down and meeting in the middle has definitely come out as a concept. Poppy, I'm going to come on to you for that one. The rest of the questions I won't necessarily ask to everybody, but this one's quite a nice opening one. And as one of our members of the future generation of Wales, do you agree with those points? Is there anything else you think needs to happen?
Definitely, thank you. First of all, hi everyone, my name is Poppy. I'm chair of the Youth Climate Ambassadors for Wales, which is an organisation of 13 to 25-year-old climate activists who aim to amplify the youth voice and encourage accessible climate action at all levels. And I saw that some people on this call are from St Joseph's in Newport. I'm currently calling you all in my sixth form common room at Lamwen High School. So it's nice to see some fellow Newportarians. I think in regards to this question, I was really refreshed to hear both the Minister and a representative from the Future Gen's office referencing the youth voice. I think that the only way we can protect the future of generations is by listening to future generations. And then it's not just about listening, it's about acting. Now, I think Wales has done a really good job at almost turning ourselves around after our impact on the planet from the Industrial Revolution. As the Minister mentioned, we've really uptaken on reforestation, on recycling, and on really important key aspects. However, I think now is the time to take that even another step further. It's to start dipping our toe into the pool of climate action that hasn't yet been explored. And that can seem a little bit scary, but it's that climate action and that almost restructure of our society and the way we do things that is necessary to really take an even further world-leading action. I also think, as the Minister mentioned, the United Nations Conference of Climate Change is coming up. And the key way to protect the future of generations is to work with the rest of the world, because as we all know, climate change isn't an issue that just affects us in Wales, and it's not an issue that's just influenced by our action in Wales. So in order to protect our future generations and protect our planet, I believe that we need to work with the rest of the world in the most constructive and effective way possible to ensure that that action is universal, because that way it amplifies the action and gives it the best impact possible to not only protect our future, but to protect the future of our planet, to protect the future of nature, and the way we see society for centuries. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer, and definitely some things to keep everybody on their toes there. Okay, I'm going to move on to question 2, which I think you've touched on in some of those. And during this week, with this, we've had schools engaging every morning with us this week, and some fantastic ideas have come out. Yesterday, we talked about nature-based solutions to climate change and the nature emergency. Touched on a few more well-known, a few that are happening in Wales, a few more wacky, like perhaps the reintroduction of mammoths. But the question we've got then is, last week, I believe Welsh Government declared a nature emergency, which, is fantastic for that recognition there. Obviously not fantastic that there is a nature emergency, but in recognition of that critical state of nature in Wales. So what's going to happen? How can Wales and the Welsh Government act on these words and look at that nature-based restoration? So Julie, if I go to you first with this one, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So we declared a climate emergency. The climate emergency and the nature emergency are the same thing, aren't they? So I'm very happy to call it as many names as you want, but they're absolutely interdependent. So one of the reasons we have a nature emergency is because our climate is warming and it's changing the way that nature behaves and responds. So they're absolutely interdependent. The more we dig up our peatlands, the more we destroy the habitat of the many species that live there, but also we warm the planet and all the rest of it. So there are a large number of interlinked things there. I do think it's important to realize that they're inextricably linked in that way. What can we do about it? So we can increase the protection that we have for our beautiful landscapes already. We are already looking to have plans put in place for lovely places like the Gwent Levels and others around Wales to see what we can do to work with local groups and the volunteers and the NGOs and third sector and all the people who are already involved to make sure that they can access the funding and the expertise they need to be able to both protect what's already in good conservation order and then spread out and restore the rest. We need to get the balance right between development and what we're doing. There's always a tension between what we need by way of hard services in Wales and what we want to protect. So we need hospitals and schools. We need them not to be built on greenfield sites where at all possible. We need them to be connected to good public transport and so on. So we need to try and get the balance right of an inevitable tension there. And we'll be working hard to do that. You see, we've announced a review of road schemes in Wales. We're currently doing called a deep dive into tree planting, though I think it should be a root and branch review myself, deep dive into blue carbon. So what we're doing is we're gathering ideas from around Wales at the moment, including from Poppy and her colleagues, as to what people think we should do, including a series of experts. I've already spoken to a number of scientific experts who are helping us reviewing our net zero carbon plan, for example, so that we can put in place the right measures in the right place. We have to make sure we don't have unintended consequences. So it's not just about planting trees everywhere, it's about planting the right tree in the right place. Some areas are wetland bogs and peatland, they don't need to have trees on them. We need to do it in the right way. We also want to put in place the National Forest. The National Forest is a place which should be reconnecting people to nature. So making sure that everybody has access to the National Forest and all of the biodiversity that brings with it. We need to protect our ancient woodlands, which are irreplaceable. The Celtic rainforest, as I know we're starting to call it, which is a great idea, because that's what it is. But we also need to have a sustainable timber industry in Wales so that we can build our housing and our buildings out of a renewable, sustainable resource. So we need to make sure that the balance of that is right as well. So there's a lot of balancing to be done here. And so, for example, I'm really keen to restore our marine protected areas, to plant seagrass where that, and kelp and so on. But again, to be absolutely certain we're doing that in the right place with the right good conservation principles. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's much to do. There's a lot of work to be done with our scientists community. The people of Wales have got used over COVID to working with the way the government works with scientists. So you'll all have been familiar with the SAGE and TAG type things that Mark Drakeford talks about when he talks about his COVID thing. So the Technical Advisory Group, TAG, the Scientific Advisory Group, SAGE. So we will be establishing groups of that sort to help us with climate change, the nature emergency, and what we should be doing, and how those decisions should be made. So a lot to do. It's really exciting, a little bit daunting, but it's not a council of despair. We absolutely can do this, and Poppy and her colleagues will be absolutely pivotal in making sure that that happens.
Wonderful, thank you. To go to the other two panelists, if you would like to add anything to that question, or what the Minister mentioned, it's in consultation to see what we would like to see as well, and what you feel is important. So if you have any thoughts to add to that. But also there's one other question that came in from a couple of pupils this morning that is quite an interesting one. Do scientists agree on climate change? And I think that ties quite well into this question with looking at the nature-based solutions. I've got an idea of an answer, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective. So would either of you like to go first on that one?
Can I answer that one by just saying yes? Because I really think the idea...
I don't mind. I'm happy to.
Poppy, the idea that any credible scientist anywhere in the world does not agree that climate change is real is just nonsense, and I just think we should just scotch it immediately, frankly, because that is just an argument we do not need to have. The people of Wales accept that climate change is real. They can see it. There are people all over the world who can see it. It's just, the answer is yes to that one. Yes.
Thank you. Poppy?
Yeah, thank you. I think in regards to whether scientists agree, I'm going to be inclined to follow the same route as our minister. I think that it's clear in the scientific evidence we're seeing that climate change is taking place. And it's clear that that is being the speed of that is being rapidly increased because of our impact on it as humans, and because of the impact we have on this earth. So I think that a lot of scientists, I think it's something like 97% of scientists agree that climate change is real and that climate change is happening. But even if we look away from the science, in our everyday life, we're already seeing it take place. And it's almost a matter of cause and effect. If we use plastic bottles, if we burn a lot of CO2, what's going to happen? Unfortunately, it's not just going to disappear. It's not just going to leave no impact. So because of that, even on a principle level of cause and effect, our actions have an effect on the planet. And if we're not keeping that in mind, it is going to have negative repercussions. Now, I'm not a scientist. I do physics A level. However, I can certainly see from my perspective as a young person, even across the world, we're already seeing the impacts from displacement of people and so many more vital changings that are happening to our planet. Now, quickly, in regards to the nature emergency, I think it's great that the Welsh Government has finally declared a nature emergency. However, as our Minister mentioned earlier, a nature emergency and a climate emergency are basically the same thing. They're very interlinked. However, they do need different solutions to fix them. I think sometimes we can fall into complacency, because when we declared a climate emergency, if we just act on that, that doesn't necessarily protect our nature as well. We need to see them as interlinked, but also equally valuable and also equally needing focus, which is why it's great that a separate emergency has been declared for this. I think in regards to tackling it, it's really important that we make sure every decision we make considers the impact it will have on the planet and it will have on nature. Now, I know that sounds quite hippie, and that sounds like, yes, put the planet first, but it is important because our planet provides everything we need to live. You know, we won't be able to build houses, or we won't be able to build schools if our planet can't provide the resources we need. It won't happen. So because of that, I believe that we need to think of things like building and think of things like the development of Wales as an interlinked thing with the development and the protection of nature. They need to work to help each other rather than clash. And I believe that is possible. We just need to open our mind to seeing it in a different structured way. But yes, climate change is real, guys.
Fantastic, thank you, Poppy. I mean, I suppose the question linked to the scientists, which came from Elise and Rhiannon, is I guess there may be some disagreement on which is the best nature-based solution to use, which is most effective, how much of an impact we're going to see, and we don't necessarily know that yet. But Irigain, did you want to bring in anything there, or I know that you've got some expertise, perhaps?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bryony. So yeah, just, you know, completely agree with what Poppy and the Minister have already said, really. Unfortunately for us, the scientists are in huge agreement around climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, some people might have heard about them, but they've been meeting for years and years and writing lots of big reports on this for years and years and years. And yeah, the message is very clear. But yeah, as you say, Bryony, it might be that the solutions kind of, there might be sort of slight differences there around the different solutions that could work for different countries across the world in terms of tackling climate change. I just wanted to come in on the nature-based solutions quickly, if that's okay as well. One of the things that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act sort of requires from government and public bodies across Wales is that they think and deliver policies and work in a far more integrated way, and that they think about how the action they can take can improve not just environmental well-being, but social, economic and cultural well-being as well. So I think, the Act provides us with, a really brilliant framework to be making decisions in a way that really thinks about all of these things, together, that we don't just think about, oh, well, we need to act on climate emergency today, and then, oh, tomorrow I need to think about the nature crisis. As everyone said, these are, one and the same problems really that need to be tackled in a really joined up and integrated way. So that's what the Act requires of public bodies in Wales, which I think again provides us with a really great opportunity. But I just wanted to mention quickly as well the work that we've been doing over the last sort of 15-18 months, looking at the possibilities around a green recovery, because we've seen, as part of the pandemic, the massive impact it's had, on everyone across the world. But we've also seen the potential in terms of how people will respond, and how quickly people will change the way that they live, and our lifestyles, etc. They've been changed massively over the last year. One of the things that unfortunately we've seen, though, is a massive increase in unemployment as well. But the work that we've been doing has looked at the potential of creating new jobs in green industries. So we know that there could be around 60,000 new jobs could be created in Wales in the next 2 years if we invest in a green economy. And one of the ideas we've been looking at is something called a National Nature Service. And this is an idea where we could establish new skills, opportunities and new jobs in Wales, which would focus on protecting and restoring Wales' natural environment. So, that's something that could help not only help Wales to respond to the nature and climate emergencies, but also address, the potential and employment issues, especially for young people. So that's an idea that we're working with lots of other stakeholders, including government, on at the moment. And we are hoping that, hopefully that will be something that Welsh Government will be keen to develop over the next few years.
Wonderful, thank you. Some really interesting points coming out there as well, and linking it back into that future of business. And we have talked during the week and this morning about the circular economy, and that would all come into that. So I think there's a question that we'll have a little bit later on that links more specifically to that area. Now we've had a couple of workshops and have been investigating our impact on nature, not just in Wales, but further afield. And Minister, you mentioned the displacement effect, but we know that some of the foods and choices we make are having an impact on deforestation globally, and quite a significant one as well. So the question we've got is, what can Welsh Government, and perhaps the public as well through our choices, do to support farmers, the public and businesses, and I'm going to add schools into there as well, in Wales, to make sure they're not using and buying products linked to deforestation? And I know it's a big issue, and I think there's been some conversations happening already around that. So, Minister, may I go to you for this one?
Yeah, sure, Bryony. I mean, it's a really complicated answer, I'm afraid, because unfortunately the Welsh Government doesn't have all the levers that we would like to have in order to be able to do this. So one of the things I would very much like to see is products to be labelled in that way. But unfortunately, I haven't got the power to do that. But we will be working with the UK government to try and get a proper labelling scheme in place, because I think people would be empowered to make a better choice if they understood where their palm oil comes from, or where their whatever it is. So there's I'd love to do that, but I can't do it myself in Wales, unfortunately. One of the big things we can do is we can make sure that the new sustainable farming scheme that my colleague Leslie Griffiths is working on, make sure that that supports farmers to make the right choices. So that is a whole range of things: the way they use their land, the kind of food they produce, the sort of biodiversity they encourage on their farms, the way they can contribute to other farmers do more than grow food. They grow trees, they grow biodiverse areas, they do all kinds of stuff. So there are lots of projects in Wales showing how farmers want to and can, and in fact do contribute to a lot of those. There's several really great projects that farmers have brought forward themselves that we can look at. But we can also help them through our liaison with the NFU and other unions acting in the sector to make sure that they have all the right information as well about where they buy their animal feed and how that's produced and so on. We can help with public procurement exercises. Sometimes the government can buy at scale things that might be a little bit more expensive if they're bought singly on farms, and allow people to have access to that. So we're looking actively at what Welsh Government procurement can do on that. Similarly for schools, so schools are not kind of directly controlled by the Welsh Government, as in I can't tell a school you do this, but what we can do, of course, is encourage them by giving them access to things that we procure centrally and producing guidance and so on. And of course the pupils themselves can make a big difference in the school through their school councils and just through making their views known. So why are plastic bottles sold in schools? Well, because I think nobody's made enough noise to stop them being sold in schools. So make some noise, Poppy. I think you and your colleagues are very capable of doing that. And in the meantime, we can make sure that the guidance going out from the Welsh Government and the procurement streams that we have in the Welsh Government discourage or ban altogether various products such as unreusable plastic bottles. Not all plastic bottles are dreadful. Single-use plastic bottles are what we're talking about here. Some plastic bottles are reusable and will last 1,000 years. So we need to distinguish as well, just to be clear. And that goes for a lot of other things in schools and in all of our public services. Actually, the people who work in those public services can have make a difference. So just in the Welsh Government, for example, when I joined several millennia ago, it seems like now, I asked why there weren't recycling bins all over the Welsh Government estate. And the answer was because nobody else had ever said, why aren't there any? So now there are. So sometimes it just takes somebody to say, what do we do here in my own office? What do we do here in my own school? Can we ask those questions? Can we think about it? Are there other things we can do? And then I am really happy to receive hundreds, thousands of emails from all of you telling me what you think that would make a difference in terms of platforms that we can put in place, information campaigns we can run, procurement strategies we can put in place, because we're really keen to do that. I mentioned that we were one of the first free trade nations. One of the things we do there is we bulk buy free trade items, coffee and so on, to help people around the world and to make sure that those products are available to people in Wales to buy. So there's lots of things we can do. The last thing I would say is we can make sure that people understand that those projects cause deforestation. So I'm not sure that that is widely understood. One of the conversations I was having this morning with a BBC journalist, as it happens, was that we need to make sure that by doing things in Wales, we aren't displacing activity. So, for example, I was asked, should we be encouraging people to eat less meat? And the answer to that is we should be encouraging people to have sustainable diets and eat the best food they can afford and so on. But we need to make very sure that by trying to drive people towards that diet, we aren't just causing them to not buy Welsh produce, but to buy produce produced abroad in very unsustainable ways with much less animal health involved in it, and probably in areas that have been deforested relatively recently in order to sustain that. So actually it's a much more complicated thing, isn't it, than just saying, oh well, don't eat so much meat. That's just it. Unfortunately, it's a much more complicated chain around the world. And then the last thing I want to say is we need to make sure that people understand how the products that they use are made. So one of the things we need to do is we need to get off our absolutely slavish addiction to oil as a human race. So you can see the background behind me. My son's delighted that I'm forever displaying his bedroom to the nation. I have to say that I tidied it, just in case you think he's weird. The paint behind me is made with oil. The shirt I'm wearing is made with oil. The cushion that you can see is made with oil. It's not just the petrol we use in our cars. So we have to have scientific advice to help us start to substitute those things with plant-based products, with things that are sustainable. And so, it behoves all of us to actually ask, is this, in my budget range, because all of us have a different budget as well, but in my budget range, is this the best product I could buy for the planet? And then just ask the question, and then the people supplying the products will be forced to think about it. And consumer power is enormous, actually. So, and of course, the government is a big consumer, so we can do that as well.
Thank you. I think there's some really key points that have come out there, and the one about actually knowing. I should say thank you to Angharad and several others who asked that question. But actually knowing the labelling and knowing, it's been quite obvious that people aren't aware of the impact that their choices have. So that's definitely one to explore further. And I'd like to come to you with one of the points that the Minister highlighted there about schools and, lobbying to get rid of plastic or changing their food within their canteens. And I know from my role of working with schools for many, many years that there's often some fantastic intentions in place, and the young people are really trying to make a change, but there's barriers in place, whether it be at the local authority level or the suppliers level. Can they use the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act to help levy a change, to help them get that change they want to see?
Absolutely. Yes, of course they can. And yeah, we'd love to see schools teaching, all children across Wales about the Act, what it means, so that they have a really good understanding of it as a legislative framework, so that when they're going into the world of work, they're able to adopt that thinking in terms of the jobs that they go into in the future as they grow up. So yes, absolutely. And I think this issue around deforestation, as the Minister was saying, it is just so complicated. And I think there's a huge lack of awareness really amongst all of us, in terms of looking at the impact of our consumption, the food that we eat, on deforestation globally. And one of the things that the Act does have is one of the 7 national wellbeing goals is for Wales to be a globally responsible Wales. So we very much have to think about the impact of the decisions we're making in Wales on everywhere else across the world. So this is absolutely something that we need to do better in terms of providing people with access to the information that they need to make better decisions on this, both personally and also, organisationally within people who work for public bodies, people who work, for local authorities who make decisions on the food that is bought and sold within schools. So yeah, there's a huge amount of work to do. There's just for people to know, there's a lot of really good information on WWF's website on this, but also to give the Size of Wales campaign a plug as well. They want Wales to be a deforestation-free nation, and they're currently developing a toolkit for people to use to help them to do that. And then just finally, the Minister mentioned procurement. I don't know how many people who are listening in know what does procurement mean, but it essentially means the process of buying the goods and the services that government and local authorities and health boards need. And across Wales, they spend a staggering, I think it's £6 billion a year buying things that they need to build schools, to provide food in hospitals and schools, etc. So that is a huge sum of money, and what that means as well is there's potential to look at what that money is spent on, and make sure that the decisions are made in a way that really tries to look at delivering environmental benefit as well as social benefit, as well as thinking about our global impact. So yeah, there's a lot more we can do.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I'm conscious of the amount of questions that there are, and before I go on to the one that Kevin's popped up for us next, it links to that really, and there's been a few suggestions come up this morning that said, and Poppy, perhaps you can give us your thoughts on this, that suggest, well, why can't we label all of our goods, our clothes, our food, our electrical items with their CO2 footprint, so that we as consumers know what impact we're having, and possibly alongside that, and this is perhaps one that I'll ask the Minister to come in on, if they do have that very high footprint, is there a way that we could maybe tax them more or disincentivize purchasing it? So what do you think about that idea, Poppy?
I think that's a great idea. I think for a lot of products, the labels would be very long and it might not fit. But I think that's a really important and a really progressive idea. What you kind of described there was something called a carbon cap, which is basically, it's a tax that would be enforced onto businesses or onto products that are exceeding a set amount of carbon. Now, this is a really interesting idea. However, I think it's something that a lot of governments are kind of off-put by, because they're worried that that will stop businesses, I guess, investing in their country, or that they're worried that it will stop businesses from cooperating with their country and adding to their country's economy. Now, to me, the only way we can combat that is by making a fuss. It's by saying, right, well, if these businesses are going to have this impact on my planet and on my future, then I'm not gonna use them. I'm not gonna invest in them. I'm not gonna give them any money, because that's the only way that they're going to change. I think, unfortunately, with a lot of the big CO2, with a lot of the businesses that create the majority of our CO2, it is always a matter of money. So when you're looking to combat that, you need to look at, right, how can I hit them where it hurts? And that's by not using their products. And a lot of that information can actually be found out really easily by just having a quick Google. It's there, it's accessible, but we just need to utilize that to prevent that from happening. But I think the idea of labeling products and having a carbon cap is really important and would hold businesses accountable. But it's just providing that incentive to make governments and businesses happy to go along with it, which is frustrating, but it is possible when, we realize our voices are powerful and impactful. All we need to do is just use them and genuinely cause a bit of a fuss. It works, I promise.
Fab, thank you. It is a difficult balance, isn't it, between that economics and the environmental. It shouldn't be, but it is. Minister, would you like to come in on that? And also this, we've got another question from Rodri that links to that really, about legislating to make sure that the things that we have can be repaired and fixed, instead of this throwaway society that we have. And I think that comes into that whole talk about, the legislation, the carbon cap and things along those lines.
Yeah, so I entirely agree with Poppy. I mean, there are some really complicated social justice issues here as well. So if we're wanting to prevent people across the globe from producing cheap food to come to developed countries, then we need to make sure that they have sustainable lifestyles. So effectively, we need to pay them to stop deforesting the countries they live in. Forgive me if some of you have heard me tell this tale before, but I think it's just worth a quick repeat. I was really privileged a couple of years ago to be able to go to the Yucatan Peninsula for a big birthday of my husband's, the place we'd always wanted to go. And while I was there, I had a real the real privilege to speak to a number of Mayan people who live on the Yucatan, who are very poor people, really very poor. Their land is really hard to farm, and it's very covered in trees. They were very keen to tell us that it was not jungle, it was a temperate rainforest, and they were very keen on it, and they knew a lot about it, and they were keen not to deforest the land. But the truth is that's made them very poor. If they did deforest it and develop it for farming, they would be less poor. So they're trying to develop a tourist industry, and there's a big issue there as well, isn't it? We're all trying not to fly, but then we deprive the people in the world who need the tourists of the income. So there are lots of complex and difficult decisions to be made here, aren't there? And then anyway, when we left there, we left in the day and we flew. Sorry, you have to fly to get there, but we flew over it. I assure you, I assuaged my conscience by putting a lot of money into carbon offset projects and so on. That's a whole nother hour to talk about, isn't it? But anyway, and you could see the forest stretching as far as you could see into Mexico, and it was beautiful. And then, of course, we landed back in Britain in the day, and you could see that Britain is deforested, largely deforested, and we have developed our land for farming. We have made ourselves rich by doing that. And there's a real social justice thing there, isn't there? We cannot be telling people you can't do what we have done while we reap the benefits of having done it. So we really do need to think hard about the way that the global economy works to disadvantage people who live in places that haven't already, degraded their landscape and aren't reaping the benefits for it. So I think there's got to be more than just saying don't buy the products. There's got to be a way of making sure that the people who now produce those products can produce things that are sustaining to the planet, that we also want to purchase, and that gives them a lifestyle worth having. So I do think it's more complicated, unfortunately, than that. That doesn't mean it can't be done, but we need to understand the complexity to make sure we don't do things with unintended consequences. Having said all of that, I think the carbon cap tax is a really good idea. Unfortunately, the Welsh Government can't do that alone. We would need the UK government to do that. And actually, sorry to be very political, but it would be better if we did it as Europe. That's a bit of a loss as well, really, because the bigger the group of people that does something, the more impact it has. So we need to be sure that we stay in touch with our European colleagues and make sure we stay aligned to what they're trying to do as well. And then, we need to work with our companies to make sure that they themselves want to. And what Poppy said just, made my heart sing. And I know from personal experience anyway that, it's easy to think that the little individual things I do don't make a difference, but they absolutely do. Your consumer power is huge, and groups of people coming together to have that consumer power is really huge. And then, sorry for the anecdote for the last one. I grew up as a vegetarian. I'm old enough to be Poppy's grandmother. I was really weird growing up, and I was a hippie too, Poppy. I know that's not fashionable now, but it was something we were quite proud of. And my parents knew about climate change when I was born at the end of the 1950s, because it was real then. We lived in northern Canada, you could already see it. So we came back and forth between Wales and northern Canada. They knew it was happening. They turned vegetarian at that time. I've been a vegetarian all my life. I remember how weird that was in school. But now, if I tell people I'm vegetarian, they say things like, oh, I don't eat much meat, or I'm vegan, which is fantastic. So the point about this story is that individual little decisions like my parents made change the world. And that's the truth. We need to understand that, and we need to encourage our young people to understand that those individual decisions change the world, and we need to encourage it.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So we've got, I'm seeing a theme coming across here. We've got, there's room for legislation where we can, but there's definitely that room for that bottom-up approach of making those choices, and I think enabling people to understand the impact of their own choices. So I took from that last one that perhaps there's an opportunity here for a little bit of lobbying of UK government. If we want to see that carbon cap idea or the labelling on food, it needs to be wider. So perhaps that's a good opportunity now when all eyes are on the UK in the run up to COP26 that we make our voices heard in relation to that. So carrying on from that, we have had this conversation going on about, do people understand about the education? And so we've had a question in from Gwen and Charlotte, and it was earlier in the week as well from St Joseph's High. Should there be more education linked to nature? And how can we make environmental education statutory in schools and have those consistent messages and resources? This is something very close to my own heart, and I have my own personal opinions on this. But perhaps we haven't heard from you for a little while here, Guy. Would you like to come in on that one?
Again, it would be another yes from us, really. We published quite a big report last year, and within that report we set out lots of recommendations, but one of the recommendations was around eco-literacy and the importance of rolling out eco-literacy across the curriculum to all schools, but also for people working within public bodies as well, so that we need them to be able to understand and make decisions, you know, in a way that you know, is eco-literate and carbon literate as well, so they, you know, they really understand the impact of the decisions they're making on the planet, on the nature emergency, as well as other things. So yeah, a big yes from me. I've been involved in eco-schools over my career. I used to be an eco-schools assessor back in the day, so I've seen the kind of fantastic success of that programme across schools in Wales, and you know, it's so amazing to go into schools, speak to the, you know, eco-schools committee. The people involved are so passionate about making changes within their school, working with the wider community as well. And I would love to see, you know, that being rolled out maybe more widely, so that the entire school becomes more involved, that it, you know, maybe just doesn't sit within just the kind of eco committee pocket, but that you're able to sort of champion it across the entire school as well. So yeah, we'd love to see that happen. Can I just make a point on the previous question around the kind of fixing and repairing? Really interesting question, I think, and I don't know how many people have heard of this initiative called The Story of Stuff. It's been around a while, but they produce these amazing animations to describe the kind of current economy that we have around resource use and why we need to move to a more circular economy. So I'd recommend people go and have a look at that, and some of the videos they've produced over the years are really brilliant. But just to give a plug as well to some of the great initiatives happening in Wales around this at the moment. So we have we've seen the growing of repair cafes across Wales. Again, if you haven't come across those, look it up. The Repair Cafe Wales website will tell you where these repair cafes are across Wales, and that's where you can go to take items from your house which need fixing. So it's a brilliant initiative in terms of saving waste from landfill. And the other initiative I wanted to mention is called Benthyg Cymru. I've been lucky enough to be involved in one in my local area. We've just opened a Benthyg in my town a couple of months ago, which is amazing. And the idea of that's in English, it's a library of things. And the idea is that exactly as you would go to the library to borrow a book, you can go to a Benthyg and borrow an item that you maybe only need to use once in a blue moon, like a trimmer to trim your hedge outside, or another item to help with DIY, or lots of things available. And the idea again is that it saves people throwing things away, so it saves waste from landfill, but it also tries to encourage that different behaviour that we need to see from people, that we're not going out and buying stuff every time we think we need something, that there's a resource there for people to go and borrow and share that resource across the community. So yeah, just a couple of positive examples, hopefully, that people can go and have a look at.
Can I just add to that, Bryony? The repair cafes are great. They absolutely are for people to go and take their stuff to get repaired if they want it, but they're also for people who can repair things to volunteer at. So I just wanted to put the volunteer bit in as well. So we have lots of people across Wales who are great at repairing stuff, so if they want to take part in a repair cafe, that would be great too.
Fabulous, thank you. I think it takes quite a shift in mindset as well, doesn't it? And personally, I share my car with my neighbour. They can borrow it when they want. But that took me a while to get into a headset, and I also have to keep it clean, which is a bit challenging. But just to kind of come back to that environmental education, and thank you for mentioning the eco schools in there, and it's something we're working really hard on, is to get that cross-school integration, and we're doing a lot of training linked to different thematic areas. But does anybody want to come in with where they'd like to see that environmental education going? I can see Poppy nodding there.
Yeah, if that's okay. I think this is a really important question. And I think, as you guys can tell, I'm obviously still a pupil. And from my high school experience, a lot of my education to do with the climate has only been taught in biology. And it's only been taught in a sense of the knowledge I'll need on questions that will come up on my GCSEs. So it hasn't even necessarily given the full picture of the climate and nature. However, I think that learning about nature and learning about climate change can be incorporated into most, if not all, subjects. Maybe not maths, but I would say most of all of the other subjects. You know, you can include it in geography when you look at the displacement of people. You can look at it in languages where you discuss this in different languages, which is important as well, because like I've mentioned previously, climate change and action is an international issue. You can mention it in English when you can look at literature or articles related around climate change. You can look at case studies. Climate action and the nature emergency, I believe, can be incorporated into absolutely every subject possible. And I think that's a really important next step that we need to take, because it is a universal issue, but when we only teach it in the sense of just biology, or maybe a little bit in chemistry and physics, then it makes it seem really detached, and it makes it seem like you can't relate to it as much. However, I do also know that the Welsh Government is implementing the new curriculum, which will hopefully provide more scope for schools to teach about climate emergency. But if you guys are interested, again, all of the organisations that have organised this event today have so many important resources, and you can work with your school through student councils, through eco-organisations, to see if this can be incorporated into your school's curriculum. Even if it's just in your PHSE lessons, there's loads of little ways you can get this in your everyday lessons.
Excellent. Poppy, I'm going to invite you to help on some of the resources we're developing, because I think you've got some great ideas there. I'm conscious of time ticking on. So there's this, is it now that you need to go, Minister? Is it?
I'm afraid I do need to go. Yes, well, a minute ago, but very soon. Yes.
We want to add any closing remarks, and then I'll pull the last question in there linked to funding and things, perhaps to Ergine. So, would you like to add anything before you have to leave?
Well, just to say, this has been terrific. There's lots of ideas. We're really open to those ideas coming forward, and anything that the government can do to put a platform in place to help, or use our buying power to do it, or help with the curriculum development. I was glad Poppy mentioned the new curriculum, because obviously Poppy is at the other end of the school, her school career. But can I also just say that education isn't just about young people. It's actually, you know, people who left school 2 years ago, they still need to be educated about the climate change. They're going to be around for the next 70 years. So we do really need to get this incorporated into lots of other things, lifelong learning, university, FE, all kinds of other areas for education, including public awareness and so on. So I just wanted to make the point that education it's about the population, isn't it? We often concentrate it on young people, and often Poppy being a good example, they're the ones who least need the education that we're offering. So I just want to make that point. And then just to say that I'm really easy to get hold of. If you want to send me your ideas, I'd be really glad to receive them. We haven't got all the good ideas by a long, long way, and I'm really, really keen to get this conversation going right across Wales, so that we do get the very best of everybody's ideas and make sure that together we can really make this difference.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, and I think you probably may be slightly bombarded now.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to be bombarded, Bryony. I really do mean it. It's always surprising to me how little bombardment I get when I make these offers, actually. So I'm really happy to be bombarded. Please bombard away. Anyway, I hope the rest of it goes well. I'm so sorry I have to go, and I'll see you all soon.
Thank you so much for joining us, and for all of your insights. And yes, I'm sure we'll be in touch. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Okay, so just to go on, we've had a question in looking at that a little bit more about energy, looking at reaching net zero by 2050. And obviously that requires quite a lot of change, with looking at greener electricity, moving away from gas, electric cars. So the question really is, are there funds in place to support businesses, schools and people to make that change? So I think you might have some thoughts on this one.
Thanks, Bryony. Yeah, that's, you know, an incredibly important question that's been asked there, I think, because everyone's talking about this target to net zero and, you know, what we all need to do to get there. But it's really hard to feel, I think, from a personal level, well, you know, what can I do, and, you know, how can I contribute? So, I mean, there used to be funds to fund things like solar panels on you know, roofs of community halls and those kind of things. I'm not entirely sure if they're around anymore, but there are things available at a UK government level. There's a scheme called the ULEV scheme, which I think stands for ultra low emission vehicles. So I know lots of councils in Wales have been getting grants from them to buy electric cars, to install electric charging points, and to start looking at things like electric vans and electric buses and things. So, you know, there are definitely things out there, but you do need to know where to look for them. But I just wanted to make a couple of points really around the cost of inaction as well. I don't know whether people will be aware, it's probably about 10 years ago now, so probably not, but there was a big report by someone called Nicholas Stern Review, and that looked at the costs of not acting on climate change, and they are equally scary, actually, as, you know, maybe the investment that we need to take action. But, you know, I think it's really important for governments and businesses and, you know, everyone to really understand that, you know, this is investment that we're looking at here. It's investing in the future. It's investing in a better future and trying to do what we can to, you know, keep the increase in temperature at, you know, as low a level as possible. It's, you know, it's a massive job. So we do need to look at, you know, as many investment opportunities and solutions as possible. So just to give you or the listeners an idea as well, we've just been doing a big piece of work to look at a programme of retrofit across Wales. So we know that a lot of the homes that we have in Wales are very poor in terms of their energy efficiency and energy rating, and people have been talking for years and years about you know, the work that needs to be done to existing homes to make them more energy efficient, make them more resilient to future climate impacts, etc. And we've just done a quite a detailed piece of work to look at, well, you know, how much is that going to cost us? We know it's going to, you know, it'll need considerable investment. It'll need billions of pounds of investment over the next 10 years. But what we found as well is actually, if you look at the economic benefits from this investment, it's actually going to, you know, that the economic benefit is actually going to be more than the investment that's needed in the first place. So it's going to lead to, you know, billions of increased GDP, billions in terms of net tax benefits as well, billions in terms of new jobs created, potential for local supply chain, and, you know, there'll be costs to the health service as well, because people won't be getting as ill, you know, living in these really cold and damp homes. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, it will require investment, but it's really important to look at this in the round and think about you know, the benefits, the economic and wider benefits that we will see from taking action on climate change. And just one final point, sorry, I think it's really important as well to think about equity here. So lots of people, you know, might be able to afford an electric car. You know, we've put solar panels on our house, you know, it cost a lot of money, but we were willing to kind of, you know, make that investment. But it's really, really important to think about those who can't afford to do some of this stuff and make sure that they're not left behind as well.
Definitely, thank you. Some really good points there. And I think one of those key ones is that, you know, knowing the cost if we don't do anything, but making it relative to the individual is a real challenge, isn't it? So that in the then and there, when they're doing their shopping, they think, right, I'm going to make a climate smart or a nature smart choice. And it's really, really hard. And I suppose linked to that is the final question. We'll wrap it up, and I know, Poppy, you've got to dash off. So if you wanted to come in on that you obviously understand the need, the crisis, and have got that buy-in, but I'm sure you've got peers who aren't in that situation, just like I have friends and who aren't necessarily thinking along those lines. So is there a way that we can involve then? And then the last question is, how can we trust the labels that they say that they're green? Are they really green? How do we know?
There is absolutely a way we can involve everyone. So a key part of the climate emergency and a key part in action is not leaving anyone behind. As I feel like I've said a lot already in this call, climate action is about bringing everyone along, and it's about making sure that everyone is involved because it impacts everyone. And to involve people in that conversation, it's about not creating hierarchy. If someone doesn't know a lot, it's about accepting that and trying to educate them, or trying to share your views and share your opinions with them in a way that's accessible and in a way that is relatable. But you could use examples of how Wales is feeling the impact of climate change and how it will impact your personal life. And as well, I think that it's really important to remember that not everyone is in a position to act on climate change. If you see your friends perhaps using a product that you know is bad for the environment, but is significantly cheaper, it's important to know when to almost lecture and when to not, because that is a bigger issue. In regards to companies, I think sometimes it really is hard to trust the claims that they're environmentally friendly, because a lot of companies try to greenwash, but it's a real kind of pick of two evils, because sometimes it's better to go with a company that's claiming to and at least doing a little bit than a company that's not even claiming to do anything at all. And it's just about sometimes trusting that they're doing that, and perhaps if they see an increase in profits when they go for a more green campaign, it will hopefully encourage real green action as well.
I think that's a great point and a really good one to finish on. And I would just say, if you're not sure, have a look at Ethical Consumer as a website, because that really helps to nail down what some of those labels mean, and which companies are genuinely doing good things for our planet and people, and which ones are perhaps doing that greenwash a little bit more. So we're going to wrap it up there. I know everybody's got places to go and perhaps is feeling a bit hungry. I just want to say a huge diolch yn fawr iawn to our panellists. Amazing answers, amazing conversations happening, and lots of food for thought to go forwards. If you didn't have your question answered today, we heard that the Minister will be happy to receive direct contact and is encouraging that. So please do email her directly about those things. We will collate all of your comments and questions into a document and a series of asks for the public and the government. And Poppy, that's your job later on today, isn't it? So for the schools who've been joining us all week, we're back again at 9:30 tomorrow to really look at how we can become effective climate communicators as our closing session. So do join us then, and thank you for all of your input so far. That's it for me. I shall finish the event there. Diolch yn fawr iawn, and see you again soon.
Diolch pawb.
Thank you everyone. Diolch.